All right, I see by by the clock it's 7:30, but that means it's 6:30 and we just forgot to reset it, right? Otherwise, meeting adjourned. No? No takers? All right. So, welcome everybody to the Public Safety Committee meeting. Michelle, if you call the roll, please. Here.
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 All right, moving on the agenda. The first item is approval of the minutes. We had a copy. I assume everyone has had a chance to review.
Move to approve.
We have a motion to approve. Is there a second?
I second.
Any discussion, corrections, anything like that? Nope. All those in favor of approving the minutes say aye. Aye. All those opposed? Motion carries. Okay, moving on. Time for public comment. Michelle?
Thank you. I live off of Arville Road, and to get down to Chesterfield Valley on a daily basis, I've got to go through Etherton Road. Is everyone familiar with this part of Etherton Road? Because there's several Ethertons off of 109. This is in the north part of Ward 2. If you will, Wild Horse Creek runs east and west, and the cut-through, as I call it, Etherton, goes from Wild Horse down to 109 and intersects there. So it is possible off of Arville Road to get into downtown Wildwood here by going south on Arville as opposed to going north to get to the valley. But it's something that I have to do every day, and as I think most of the people that live off of Arville have to do that. Etherton is a subdivision, if you will. There are individual homes, private residences all along there. The speed limit is 25 miles an hour. There is a one-lane bridge there. Just tonight, I went south on 109, and somebody was cutting through behind me, and by golly, every time. Michelle, if I could use you as a victim here. Let's pretend that you're at your imaginary car steering for 9 and 3. 9 and 3, which is now the proper 10 and 2. And you're driving along at 25 miles. All of a sudden, you look in your mirror. Right behind me. I've just come off of 109, 50 miles. I'm not. Michelle, I want to get the road. See, it doesn't matter the speed limit, or I got a one-lane bridge coming up. All too often, I have been played chicken with by the person oncoming from 109 when I'm going to my house up on Arville at that one-lane bridge. Who's going to yield the way? Okay, it's a safety hazard. I've lived there 23 years, and it's just gotten worse. The numbers I see here, and believe you me, I try to be a critical thinker as opposed to an emotional person. And so the numbers, I guess, since the installation of the signs, and then that say no cut through from either Wild Horse or 109 to each other, says the traffic count for cut throughs has come down. Yep, those are good numbers, but I don't know how you change the circumstances I illustrated with Michelle's help here. Other than let's cut off Etherton Road for any access from 109. That's not good. The fire department going to need something like that should there be blockage. Captain, I believe I spoke to you about a circumstance one time when I was had one of these Michelle Keith, Crazy Keith, or Mayhem Keith incidents with someone behind me, because I honestly, I'll swear on a Bible, I follow the speed limit. And boy, the people get pissed get very upset about that. And they're riding me as I did with Michelle here. What's my solution? Well, let's see, some logic applied. 109 and Wild Horse Creek Road has a four-way stop. So I would say let's counter that with a stop sign at the intersection of Arville Road and Wild Horse, Arville and Etherton. Why? For the reason I just cited, but there's another very good reason. There is a steep hill as you come down Arville Road. And I guess it's been 6 years ago when we had a snow, or maybe it was an ice storm, I don't recall. But there was a lady with two children in a Dodge van, and she lost control of the vehicle as she's going down. And she ended up across the ditch. And just prior to that, here comes somebody on Etherton speeding along, trying to go through the cut-through. That's a dangerous situation, which could be thwarted by a stop sign and control the traffic pattern there. That I would say that would be number one. Number two is I would think to make an additional deterrent, not 2 times but 3 times over the going through the 109 Wild Horse Creek intersection. Let's put a stop sign at the intersection of Etherton Valley Subdivision at the south, and then one up at the north. That'd be 3 stop signs that I'm proposing or suggesting that we do that. I'm sure everybody that traverses Etherton Road, including my fellow citizens off of Arville Road, are just going to hate me for that. But to me, that would be the ultimate deterrent, an equal deterrent to, equivalent to having to make a stop at 109, and Wild Horse would be installation of a stop sign at Arville. I can't say about the safety of the intersection at Etherton Valley North and South. Those are flat, so it would make I don't know. Most people probably would just ignore it if they thought they could get away with it. But that's where I'm coming from. That's my input here to you folks on the Board of Safety. It is not a good situation, and I don't know what should I do. I mean, should I just, when someone's behind me, a rhetorical question, someone's behind me and they want to go faster, I should just follow them, speed up? I had that occur to me in Chesterfield. What road was I on down there? Off of Kerrs Mill Road, as you approach there, I turned on to, is it Shepherd, I think, guess it is, or Valley Road. And I'm doing the speed limit, 25, and someone comes up behind me, and even though double the yellow line, got to get instant gratification, got to get where they're going, no matter what the law is. I'm above the law. So, any questions of me? Okay.
No, thank you very much.
Thank you.
And believe me, I sympathize with your concern.
I forget who told me, but the city does not like to install stop signs in neighborhoods because other than to control congestion, not so my circumstances, I was told, would not apply. So I'm asking for a variance.
Okay, yeah, that does seem to be the norm for use of traffic signs. It's not necessarily to slow traffic speed, but it's something we can definitely consider. Thank you.
Yeah, nobody says that, right. Hello. I'm in the Woodcliff Heights subdivision, which is also in the agenda. I'm one of the trustees. I didn't know if I was supposed to fill out a card or just wait till that. I didn't know. So we were here in, was it September? September, October, I don't know, with the initial part of the talk about speeding around our subdivision down Strucker Road into Woodcliff Heights, and then up through our hill. So if you've ever seen our subdivision, it's a really steep incline that goes up and then into the subdivision. And people have been flying up and down the hill. So I'm a teacher. I borrowed a speed gun from school and took it home and did it. And they're actually only going 27, but it looks like they're going super fast. And I'm wondering if it's because of the incline. 28, 27. So, I mean, every once in a while you got a teenager that's going 35, but I get that. But anyway, I didn't know if one of the things that we thought of was maybe lowering it to 20, if that would help. I didn't really know. The problem is people are trying to get a inertia going up that hill because it's so big. They come flying around that corner and they're in the middle of the road, not on the side, and they're going fast. And so, I mean, they are flying. I'm right at the top of the hill, like almost to the top. So I'm one of the trustees in the subdivision. And then the other problem is when you come down to the bottom of our hill, you come to Strecker, and it's kind of a blind. I know it says it's not a blind curve, but it really is. When you stop at the end, they painted a white line, which is one of the things they suggested doing last time. And I took a picture from the white line, and from the white line, you can see even less than you normally could. So I don't know if the white line wasn't painted in the right spot, or I don't know. They originally said if you painted a white line, then you would know how far you can go out. They didn't think we were going out far enough to see around. But the white line, I took a picture. It's on my phone. I tried to send it to Lauren, but it didn't work. Yeah, I have it right here. Can I plug it in? Is that how it works? There's a cord right here. Does this go up there? Yep, there we go. Okay, so here's a picture. There's me right behind that white line. And if you notice, if you're looking, I don't know north or south. My husband does, but I don't get that. But if you're looking that way on the road at the white line, you can pretty much see no car coming. Here it is zoomed in from where I was at. So you have very little time to actually see if there's a car coming. The speed limit there is 30, but the cars go way faster than 30 there. My little clock caught 40s and 50s. So when you are at that white line, you can't see the people come flying at you. And then here's another picture that is if you see the white line there, it's like past where I'm at. And that's how far you have to get out to actually see down the road to see if the cars are coming at you. I don't know if the white line is a help or hindrance, but you have to really scoot your car past that line to see up the road. Oh, I didn't take a picture that way because the other side is not a problem. Usually you can see them coming from that way to the other side. The stop sign is right by that white line. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it might be like stop sign and then the white starts right after it. The white line was just painted like a week ago, maybe a week or two ago. But it's very hard, if you can see from this one here, if you're stopped at that white line. And I have a tiny car. I have a little Audi. So if you have an SUV, you're even further back because your nose is longer. I know it said there's no reported accidents, but I know there's been many near misses and swerves and jamming on brakes, and I've seen them multiple times myself. So. Well, the fence is going around that. It's part of that Wildwood walking trail. It ends kind of right. So that's the walking trail kind of goes down here into where our entrance to our subdivision is. You can see it kind of there. And then it goes right across our street, but then it only goes like maybe 400 feet and then ends right onto Strecker Road. So nobody goes past here for the walkway because you would like go into Strecker Road with no sidewalk and get run over. That's what you can't see around the fence and I don't know if it's the retaining wall. It's mostly the retaining wall and the fence, I guess. The retaining wall is pretty tall. I know you can't move that retaining wall. That's $1 million retaining wall. I get it. But we were trying to figure out if there's some more way to see. We were told the engineers know it. There's plenty of sight distance, but obviously if you're stopped at this line, you cannot see. So you wind up inching your nose out further and further and going like this in your car so that you can see around and then gunning it when you think you have it clear. Now at night, it's not a problem because you can see headlights coming. But in the daytime, it's very hard. And if the people are going the speed limit, you can usually be okay. But if that person's flying, it's hard. And a lot of times they do. And I will admit myself, 30 feels very slow on that road. That's what the speed limit is. Nobody goes it. But the police officers have been sitting at the end of our road every morning, getting people. My son likes to stand there and watch them get busted. He thinks it's funny. So they get people constantly because they are flying down that road. So it's right at the bus stop for the kids too. That's where the bus stop is for high school. It's right at that corner with the stoplight. Stop sign. So, that would not be it. There we go. So, anyway, those were our two issues in Woodcliff Heights. So they put up speed limit signs last time. And maybe those helped a little bit. I'm not really sure, but I think it just feels faster than it really is because of that huge steep incline in our subdivision. So yeah, if you put a sign for 20, I don't know if people would actually listen to it anyway, but I didn't know if that would maybe cut down on the speed or. So there's one at the top of almost at the top of the hill, and then one coming back down the hill. Our subdivision used to have a lot of older people, so it wasn't as big of an issue speeding, and now we're getting a lot of turnover and we're getting a lot of kids that are in the road. So before somebody gets run over on our street, we were hoping to slow people down. But like I said, they're not going as fast as they look. I think it's just the hill. And the fact that they're not on the side of the road, they're coming up the middle because of that. It's a hill and an embankment at the same time. I didn't take pictures of the hill. I probably should have. Okay. Oh, does it? Yeah, we did have a hill last time. Yeah. But the line was just painted a week or so ago. There you go. Thank you.
We live stream, that way anyone who's watching can hear you.
Thank you for again allowing me to speak. We have a circumstance very similar to what you just presented on Etherton. As you go from north to south, heading towards 109 to get onto Arville Road, you must make a left-hand turn, and there is a sweeping curve, and you can't always see the oncoming traffic until they're right on top of you. So another motivation for having a stop sign at Arville. Thank you.
No other public comment? Okay. Next item is for information. I see we have nothing. Moving on then to old business, and we'll start with Woodcliff Heights.
Thank you, Mr. Marshall. Appreciate it. I did want to first recognize that we have our new city, and I don't know how long we'll continue to call him new, but our city administrator is with us, our newer city administrator, Sam Anselm, primarily to talk about the police budget further on the agenda, but I wanted to recognize him being here tonight. If you don't know, Sam is here. So moving forward, I want to talk to you about the discussion that was brought to your attention relative to Woodcliff Heights subdivision. Excuse me. Again, this item was on your agenda earlier this summer, and this information was previously presented to the board. I believe it was in July. And at that time, the trustees did bring to you their concerns relative to traffic and speeding issues on both Woodcliff Heights Drive as well as Strecker Road. I did want to point out, again, with regard to Woodcliff Heights Drive itself, the speed survey that was done some time ago did show the average speed was 22 miles an hour and the 85th percentile was 27 miles an hour. The posted speed limit on Woodcliff Heights Drive is 25 miles an hour. So those figures from the department's perspective are pretty typical of local roads and residential streets. We'd like to have the 85th percentile right at 25, which is the posted speed. Frankly, you would be, in most subdivisions, you would find it to be around 27 miles an hour. So I wouldn't find that the numbers we're seeing are, frankly, startling or concerning. They're really more typical of what, in my opinion, we see on local residential streets in the city of Wildwood. And again, the average speed, the 22 miles an hour, is actually below the 25 that is posted. Relative to the request, I think the one request relative to Woodcliff Heights Drive was the possibility of putting stop sign at the court. Previously, when we talked about that, the department was not in favor of that recommendation for a number of reasons. Of course, the grading of the road, as was referenced earlier, Woodcliff Heights Drive is on a 12% grade. It's a relatively steep grade up from Strecker Road, so placing a stop sign in the middle of that gradient is concerning, primarily from winter condition standpoint, when the road might be icy or snow covered. So that was one of the concerns that we definitely brought relative to putting a stop sign at that intersection. Moving to Strecker Road, the police were kind enough, and I think we said we would do this at the last time you had this topic. The police were kind enough to do a few more speed surveys on Strecker Road, and if you recall, the concern previously was more with regard to the fact that Strecker was under construction to the north, so the traffic patterns were disrupted due to the construction that was ongoing. So once the bridge over Cox Creek was constructed, traffic was back to its normal pattern. The police were able to do a couple new speed surveys on Strecker Road, and the location was near Woodcliff Heights Drive. That information is in the memo that I provided you. Unfortunately, on Strecker Road, the numbers we got were 40 for the 50th percentile speed range from 40 and 37 miles an hour. The 85th was 44 and 42. So still at that location, the speed survey results were above this posted speed limit of 30 miles an hour at that location. So some concern relative to that as well. I would reiterate, I think what we mentioned previously, that the police, and Captain Mundell could certainly speak to this, did check the crash records for Strecker Road in the vicinity of Woodcliff Heights Drive, and going back to 2014, per their records, there was no indication of any reported crashes in this location. So I wanted to point that out to you again as well. What was discussed earlier was the site distance, and we provided some photographs of the location. The subdivision and Woodcliff Heights Drive, when it was constructed, were designed to provide adequate site distance. Now clearly the wall does restrict your line of sight, and I think we talked about this previously. It does require a motorist to pull up to the edge of the road, but if you do so, you can see. Again, there's engineering criteria that we follow that's been developed that tells how much sight distance a driver or motorist should have to turn from a minor street onto a main road such as Strecker. So we did evaluate that, and the results that I provided last time, I've revised them slightly only because of the fact that we're trying to reflect the speed of traffic on Strecker Road, not the posted speed limit. So relative to the new speed surveys that we did, I revised those figures. So based on the engineering criteria for 45 mile an hour traffic on Strecker Road, to turn left, which is the main sight distance concern, you would need 500 feet. And as I reported last, the actual sight distance that we measured was 527 feet. So it does meet the criteria at that location. So from an engineering standpoint, we feel it's adequate. Certainly it's not as good as people would like to have, and certainly if you do not pull all the way to the edge of the road, you're not going to get that sight distance. So the stop bar that was striped, we can certainly reevaluate the location of it. I have to admit, I have not been out there personally and seen where it was striped, but the intent with the stop bar was to encourage motorists to pull their vehicles closer to the edge of the road and get them close enough where they would get the favorable line of sight. But we can certainly reevaluate the location of that stop bar. So moving forward, I did put some potential recommendations in the memorandum to you for tonight's meeting, things that we could consider. Obviously enforcement, and Captain Mundell can certainly speak more to that issue, but I included enforcement in the memorandum, continued enforcement to try to pull that speed limit down on Strecker Road and also potentially on Woodcliff Heights Drive. I think this speaks somewhat to the issue of speed limits and what is a reasonable speed limit on a rural type road such as Strecker Road. And it's difficult to find a speed limit that is right for everything. People will drive a speed they feel is comfortable on a highway unless you have regular, consistent, daily enforcement. And I think you probably know that as motorists. There's probably spots, and one I can always point out to is Clarkson Road in Clarkson Valley, where the police sit. I drive the speed limit there anytime I go through there. But otherwise, if you're not aware that there's enforcement out there, you're likely to drive the speed that you feel comfortable driving. And putting a speed limit that's too low sets an unreasonable expectation with regard to enforcement. It also lets people think that people should be driving a slower speed than they really are. It sets up a situation where they think traffic is slower, and that's their expectation. So there's a danger to posting a speed limit too low. You want them to be reasonable. So I guess I would argue, in some degree, the posted speed at 30 miles an hour on Strecker Road is probably too low. It should probably be a higher speed in this location than 30 miles an hour. Some additional comments that were brought up at the last meeting. Street lights certainly would be favorable for nighttime conditions, dusk to dawn light. Certainly the department would not be opposed to that, although, as I said before, we have not typically done that, and we do not do that outside of town center where we install and maintain street lights. It's all limited to the town center area currently. A traffic mirror was suggested prior at the last meeting. That could be installed as well. If we can find a suitable location for that, that's a relatively low cost feature that could be done to help improve the ability to see oncoming traffic. We would not oppose doing that. We certainly feel that an intersection warning sign would be appropriate in this location, and I think I provided you the example that I was referencing in the memo. We could certainly provide that on the northbound and southbound approach to the intersection. In fact, what I would suggest if we went this direction would be to add a plate underneath the sign that referenced Woodcliff Heights Drive to provide more awareness of motorists of the intersection ahead. So that would be an easy solution, or an easy thing that we could do for the road in the vicinity of Woodcliff Heights Drive. And again, we did talk about stop signs, and the department would not be supportive of a stop sign on Strecker Road in this location as well, because it would certainly not meet warrants for a stop sign on always stop at that location, and it would not meet motorist expectation either. On a higher speed road like that, you're setting up a situation that motorists may run the stop sign, and you could create a serious accident in that fashion as well. Unwarded stop signs do create a liability to the city if we install them. I know we have them out there, but if they are run, we do have liability. So the department does not recommend using them for speed control purposes, but to assign right-of-way where necessary. And I guess with that, I'll certainly be open to any questions or any further comments that you might have with regard to this location.
Yeah, if you don't mind, Rick, we talked about this at some length the last couple of meetings, and we did talk about a traffic mirror, and I wonder, last time we looked at this, we said the mirror is going to have to go on a property across Strecker Road, and I wonder if anybody's ever made contact with the residents over there to see if it's even possible we could use their property. They probably we'd have to go on an existing pole, so there's a couple of issues there, but that seems like a simple solution. Is it Helena? Selena? Telena, I'm sorry. Like the rest, like pizza. All right, got it now. Telena, thank you. I think you said the most poignant thing, that is at night, when you've got lights coming, the speed's really kind of not an issue because you can see the cars coming, right? So the mirror is the daytime solution for that. So it seems to me like the mirror and we think before we said that the signs you recommended, Rick, for the upcoming intersection were the two things that were very low cost but probably very effective in addressing this issue.
Did you look at the sign at all? Or the mirror location? It's installed, yeah. So yeah, traffic mirror would likely be on an independent pole, but it's really something we look into doing.
Just a comment on the mirror. I'm not comfortable with the mirror. Just my suggestion that mirrors aren't out there in a lot of places, and I'd be concerned that a driver would be paying attention more of what's happening in the mirror as opposed to what's coming at them on their sides. I think it's a little bit of a distraction, but it definitely is not a common item out there. But it's something, that I guess people would become accustomed to and how they used it and judge where traffic is as it's approaching them. So just my observation or comment.
Yeah, I'd like to, I was just getting ready to ask Rick if there was any published literature out there on I haven't done any research, but on the use of mirrors. And because I tend to agree with the captain on that issue. That mirrors may be more of a distraction.
Well, Captain and I have had that discussion. We have mirrors. Brendan, do you know how many we have? We have probably, maybe 5 where we have sight distance issues. But I will tell you, they're all much worse than the situation that we have here, where we have them installed. I think that's fair to say. So, I mean, they do serve a purpose. Residents, I guess, do get used to them. The regular residents who know that the problem exists tend to utilize them. But on the flip side, I don't believe that they are considered, and I don't believe they're included in the Manual on Uniform Traffic Control Devices as an approved device. I think the general consensus is to try to eliminate the problem where you can, but it's difficult in many cases to address these problems that are out there. Historically, they're very expensive to address, and a lot of times they may only involve a handful of residents that are impacted.
Yeah,
so
I mean,
it's a
typically
difficult
you see
situation.
them, at least I have. You try when you have a true blind corner of a building, you're coming around, and in close quarters, they seem to make more sense than when we already are meeting the sight distance criteria. I'm not sure that I think they'd be warranted personally.
Rick, as far as the light, street light, what's involved with that? Because I'd certainly be in support of better lighting at that intersection.
So typically what has been done is the residents would, or the HOA would contact Ameren, and they typically will install it, and then will end up paying a monthly fee to Ameren for the installation, essentially. So it's similar to the street lights that are in the subdivision already. Potentially, Ameren would install it at their cost, and then they would turn around and then bill the HOA for the light. That's my understanding.
Like I said, now it's better if I do that. But the people coming down didn't feel like they didn't do. So we did update all of them. So people, we don't have 3 poles that are on. So they knew you better.
Sure. So do you feel that lighting has helped in the situation for that light?
Would light it up more, but my safety issue doesn't hurt the light as much.
Right.
I can actually see cars but it did, when people were coming down, they didn't realize we were trying to come out because they didn't realize it was something. So now that we put all those lights on the monument, it glows all over.
Yeah, I think the other suggestion was those intersection signs. Certainly giving approaching traffic a warning that there is something there. It is kind of hidden with that the block wall, that it does kind of appear.
And that really gets to the source of my concern, because I know our photo shows one perspective, but in the photo Talena displayed with the line, it appears it's set back a bit, so it kind of alters the perspective. I'm just looking at it from, with the fence and the obstructed sign. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It's put there. It's not put out where the street. So you really have to pretty much get your nose right to where unconstructed to get that. Otherwise, you're back at all. So you pretty much stop at the line and hit forward about 8 feet. So you don't really know exactly what it's about. Because we've had people honk at us or yell, push out, because you touch it out. They think we're coming at them, but we're not there.
One thing we could potentially look at doing would be to put maybe dash the edge stripe through the driveway, through the intersection. That would be a little unusual. Maybe we could look at potentially doing that to better mark the edge of the through lane through Woodcliff Heights Drive, if that makes sense. We might be able to do that, so that gives another indication. Yes, basically.
Making it more visible to the drivers on Strecker.
On Strecker, it would, yeah, I think that would give a better indication of where the edge of pavement really is potentially.
Okay. So, just having heard my fellow members up here, I'm curious if anyone has a motion they would like to put forward as far as an action. If not, I've got a couple thoughts I'll put forward then for that. Just following up on what Dave said, I think the putting a sign up, the intersection warning sign, is a very good idea. I'm intrigued by the mirror notion, although I do take note of your concerns about the distraction, and then possibly relooking at the striping. Excuse me, the line, but I'm not sure where the stop sign is, and I think those lines have to be contiguous with the stop sign.
Rick, can you answer that? The placement of stop line, does it have to be in line with the stop sign, or can it be, I've seen it moved up in other intersections, not necessarily in Wildwood, but in other places where it's further up to be more, conducive to the visibility aspect of it.
I think the intent was to stripe the stop bar and give folks a visual indicator of where they should pull the vehicle, so you had the most favorable line of sight. That was the intent. I don't know if that got relayed to the contractor necessarily. So I'd like to take a closer look at that and see if we did not get that and there's a potential we could move it 2 feet. That would certainly help tremendously. So I think the department's going to, I'll take that on as an item to follow up with regardless, to see if it could be improved. So I guess to answer your question, I don't believe that the stop bar has to be at the location of the stop sign.
If I may ask, Elena, what are the expectations of the HOA? Did you come tonight? Does your HOA have a recommendation, or were you following the lead of the department and saying this?
We came a couple months ago. We didn't have any ideas of what to do. Pulling out of our subdivision.
Okay.
It's really bad when it's icy because you can't gut it fine. So
Yeah.
I actually go out the front. I go out.
Yeah.
But we just wanted to help try to figure out. We saw a mirror on Strecker and
There's one on.
or whatever it is. So when Strecker turns and it goes Strecker one way and the other way, I think it's right. So there's one there kind of on Ridge. That's where we kind of got the idea.
It's on Valley Road.
We problem is if you go faster, less. So we were just trying to find something. We really, my other two trustees are one's in New York, so I don't travel as a teacher.
But yes, Scott, given all of our discussion, I would make a motion that the city, that we entertain the installation of the warning sign, the intersection warning sign, as an action. And we also I would include in that motion that we go back and ask the HOA, maybe with the help of their council members, to determine if the HOA is willing to put up any money for any of the other improvements, such as a mirror or another street light or so on. Is that a fair compromise at this point of taking some action, but also asking the HOA to step up and say, we're willing to do some things as well?
That's why we only have 24 houses in our subdivision. But we did save money. To try to, if we wanted to make it brighter for people. Like I said, at night, I'm not worried about the light. People couldn't see us, but now with our time, so I think the lights have to be for the daytime. And I know they say that those like this.
Chair, I'll restrict my motion to that we direct the Public Works to look into the cost and the installation of a warning sign on Strecker Road.
And could we, I like this idea of the dotted line, maybe you're moving that up to where the road is. Because I'd say now it's about from me to him, where I think the road is.
Okay.
Let me amend it one more time and include.
It is yours.
And include the recommendation from Public Works on the cost of striping the road as well.
Okay. So we do have a motion on the floor to add the sign and look into the striping. Do we have a second?
I second that.
Okay. We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Amendments to the motion that has been multiply amended? No, hearing none. All those in favor say aye. 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 All those opposed? Motion carries.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody, and thank you for coming. All right. Moving on to Etherton Road. Rick?
Thank you, Mr. Marshall. Again, you heard some public comment regarding Etherton Road. I assume the resident is still with us this evening. This item has been in front of you on multiple occasions, as you probably are aware, or most of you are aware previously. So last year you considered this item, and ultimately a recommendation was made that went to the City Council to restrict through traffic on Etherton Road. Again, this is the section of Etherton Road between Route 109 and Wild Horse Creek Road. At one time it was, I believe, the old Route 109, which is probably why it's such a nice cut-through route, apparently, in the area. So it does cut through between Route 109 and Wild Horse Creek Road. You may recall before we acted on this issue previously, the department did do a traffic study to try to get a sense of how many vehicles were cutting through, and I think the resident referenced the material that was provided to you tonight. We updated that traffic study. Brendan was nice enough to crunch the numbers for us today. We went out earlier this week and updated the traffic study to get a sense of whether the restriction that was put in place early this year had any effect. So we passed the restriction of through traffic through City Council. We posted signs on the road previously earlier this year. And we went out this week and we tracked cars using license plates during the morning and the evening peak hour and summed up the number of cars that were apparently cutting through. And it actually does show some reduction. I was kind of surprised with those numbers, and I don't have them in front of me. But if you do look at the information, and I assume that you do have this in front of you, But the top table. The top table is the first study, and the lower table is the one we just completed. So if you compare the top to the bottom, you will see some benefit, we believe, that has resulted from the restriction and the signs being posted. So essentially in the morning, and I can't read that. I think it went from 73 to 60%, if I'm seeing the numbers correctly. Thank you. And then in the evening, it went from 63 to 33, a much greater decrease, and that's percent of vehicles that were cutting through. Now, clearly, it's still occurring, but it was, at least from the department's perspective, a favorable result, showing that the signs did have an impact potentially. So we feel like there was some positives that resulted. Clearly, the issue is still there. From our perspective, it's twofold. It's the number of cars, and I think it was alluded to earlier, the speed of the traffic as it's cutting through. I would like to make a couple other points. Since we brought this to you previously, I think it was mentioned earlier that MoDOT is looking at an improvement project at 109 and Wild Horse Creek Road to install a new roundabout at that intersection. That is the location where the always stop is in place currently. So MoDOT did apply for federal funding to rebuild that intersection as a roundabout, and they were awarded funds earlier this year during the summertime. So they do have funds, and they do have that project programmed, or it will be showing up on their program as an improvement project to install the roundabout. So that is coming. Unfortunately, it's not going to occur for at least 3 years, probably 4 years, frankly. So it's not going to solve the problem anytime real soon. I would make a couple points, though, regarding the recommendation or the suggestion to install stop signs. And again, that's commonly the most recommended solution to problems such as this. But I would recommend at least that you consider one thing. Well, there's probably two mechanisms why people are cutting through. We believe, and we know that people are cutting through because the navigating apps that are out there, Google and Apple, are directing traffic on the road. So if you're on 109 and you've plugged a destination into Google or Apple, those mapping apps, it will direct you onto Etherton Road. So we know that that's one component. We believe very strongly that's one component of the cut-through traffic. Now, those folks are probably not local, maybe. They're probably from out of the area, I would guess. But that's hard to say. We just don't know. The other component is we expect that because of this always stop that's in place with the delays that are being incurred as a result of the always stop in the peak hours, that folks are just frankly avoiding that intersection, and they're cutting through to save time. I guess what I would suggest, though, is that the installation of stop signs, which would by and large be unwarranted, would not increase the amount of delay, in large part to a magnitude that would deter someone from cutting through relative to the delays that they're going to experience at the always stop. So the point I'm trying to make is the always stop, if you wait in the queue to get through that intersection, your delay is probably more on the order of 5 minutes, 6 minutes. I don't know exactly, but when I've traveled through it, sometimes it's extensive. But when you add 3 stop signs on Etherton Road, you might incur a few seconds of additional delay at each stop sign. By and large, you're adding seconds of delay on that route. You're not adding minutes of delay. So to think that adding 3 stop signs is going to discourage traffic from cutting through, I think, is probably short-sighted, frankly. At least with the current situation in the peak hour. Because right now, there would still be plenty of incentive to cut through. If you're trying to avoid 5 minutes of delay, you're still going to be willing to incur another 10 seconds of delay that might be provided by those 3 stop signs. Does that make sense? So the department, again, does not support the installation of the stop signs. We recognize it is a low-cost solution. There are studies that have shown that the installation of unwarranted stop signs actually cause people to speed up to make up for the lost time that's resulted from the delay the stop sign occurs. So there's that aspect of it as well. Obviously, the stop signs, as I've said before, do add some liability to us by putting them up because they are not in compliance with the criteria that we follow, which is the manual on uniform traffic control devices. So with that, I did provide some other options potentially that could be considered on Etherton Road, including enforcement or continued enforcement of the speed limit and or cut-through traffic restriction. But also we could look at speed humps potentially, which are shown to reduce traffic speeds when they have been constructed. We have had some history of doing that here with the city of Wildwood. The other thing that we have not done but could be considered would be the installation of an LED sign, a permanent LED sign that would display your speed limit. We have done that elsewhere in the city of Wildwood to provide a 24/7 readout to motorists as they go by that location to tell them what their speed is relative to what is the posted speed. Those are something we have the ability to do on a temporary basis now with the equipment that the police have, but this would be potentially a permanent installation, might be solar powered, but would be operational 24/7 at all times. And then finally, the last item that I mentioned on the memo was actually considering the removal of the street, which would be a fairly drastic measure, but it would solve the problem. And the thought there would be to look at removing the street, physically removing it from 109 to Orville Road. So the Orville Road traffic would be forced to utilize Etherton Road, and they would have to access, or their ingress would be off of Wild Horse Creek Road to the north only. It is possible if something like that were done that you could leave, or it could be investigated that you would provide a means for emergency vehicles to utilize the old road potentially as a way to access that area. So I'm not ready to say this is an option that is realistic, but it's certainly something we could look into and would solve the problem, no doubt. So with that, I'm certainly open to any questions that you may have.
Yeah, Captain Mundell, have we had actual enforcement there in terms of how many cars have been ticketed for cutting through, if any?
I would say probably none, honestly. Because the restriction of it being local traffic applies to really anyone in the city. Any resident of the city, as opposed to you don't live on this street, you get a ticket. And we definitely can't just stop someone to see who they are and where they're going. We open it up for complaints there. So any enforcement that's happened up there is usually based on speed. We try to have a presence up there when we can. But as was stated, I think when we first talked about this, that it was going to be a very hard ordinance to enforce.
Hey Rick, I kind of look at the speed humps in terms of cut-through traffic like I do the stop signs. It's almost, to me, it would almost be the same effect. It's going to slow me down a few seconds to get over the speed hump like the stop sign would, but then I'm not sure that I really like removing the road, but that would certainly solve the problem. But from the turn restrictions, now that would become an enforcement issue, I suppose, so the captain would have to, but that would be more definitive at least. It's not a matter of whether the guy was cutting through, it's a matter of black and white. He either turns when he shouldn't turn or he doesn't, I guess, unless he's a resident. But I'm also impressed by, these are some pretty substantial reductions, I think, we had in cut-through traffic. I don't know if it's all contributed to the installation of the signs, but there seem to be some pretty good reductions there. Captain, do you have any thoughts on the turn restrictions?
I think we did discuss that the first time around. It's certainly an idea, but it affects the residents that live there, quite a bit. Yeah. We're making those stops. It's dangerous to make the stops, whether it's on Etherton or on 109, and potentially I'm sure we'd be asked that if it was a resident, let them go. Well, they're being inconvenienced by the stop, and we're putting ourselves in danger in making the stop, and then really nothing's occurring, then we're more or less ticking off the residents, I think. Trying to identify the people that are the issue doing the cut through. If people read the signs and followed the signs, and yeah, it would solve the problem, but we know that's not going to happen.
Yeah.
So as far as posting a guy out there, we just talked about another situation that we have a speed issue here, so we need an officer there, and now we're going to add some turn restrictions, so we got to have an officer there. These are all situations where we run out of people pretty fast.
Eat your manpower up real quick.
Exactly. So it's an idea, but again, it comes down to enforcement. We put something in place, and we got to make sure somebody's there to always enforce it. So.
So it's an ideal, but not necessarily a good one,
Right.
in your opinion.
I was surprised too by the results. We put those, or the city put those signs in, and there has been some effect apparently from people paying attention to the signs. It didn't go away, but it had some impact. So,
Yeah. Okay.
and maybe turn restrictions would have some impact, but it's not going to totally solve it.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
So, Mr. Reynolds, pardon me for asking, but it seemed to me that part of the big problem, yes, volume, but speed, right? Which is why I'm rather intrigued by the notion of a LED, not LED, but a road sign there that gauges their speed and flashes it at them. Because if we had some impact, and I think we can see from the numbers, appears to have been a reduction in the volume of the traffic, but certainly the speed of the traffic has not been impacted, and perhaps a permanent radar sign reminding people as they're approaching, what the speed is, and this is your current speed, would have that effect.
It's feedback, definitely. But how that gets installed and who's pays for it, I guess, becomes a real question. They're not cheap devices. It's several $1,000s for a piece of equipment like that, and then more or less has to be maintained. It's either got to be solar or a battery. If it's got a battery, it's a recurring cost. That type of stuff. So.
Any further questions or comments? Yeah, please, Steve.
Yeah, Rick, just off the wall thinking, is there any possibility that the segment of Etherton between 109 and Orville could be taken private? That the residents in that area could choose to take that segment on their own, and therefore we would block it off at 109 as a private drive and at Orville going south as a private drive. Is that even remotely feasible?
I'm not aware of that situation occurring. I suppose you probably aren't necessarily either in the city of Wildwood. If it was private, there would have to be a mechanism to maintain it established. Usually when we have private streets, we have an HOA and that's responsible. Or it's not to say it couldn't happen here. I don't know there is an obvious single HOA. It would have to be some kind of a arrangement where there were entities set up to contribute to the cost and the maintenance of it. The north end is in the city of Chesterfield, so I don't know how that might impact that possibility. But there could be some concerns there as well. So I don't know if there would be a reason why it couldn't be done from a legal standpoint. I'd have to talk to our city attorney, but it's a possibility.
Hey, Brendan, could we get the picture of the map? Or Rick, do you have that on yours?
I have.
The Etherton Road Map? Because the one we have in ours, you can't really see the road. And I'm still trying to picture where Orville. Oh, here
That
we
doesn't
are.
show
Okay.
the whole extent of Orville. I could pull up Google Maps on here potentially too.
It's fairly close.
Right, it's fairly close.
And this is the other stuff.
But it does give you an indication of if we remove the section from Orville to the south, essentially Orville would continue all the way to the north, and they would access from Wild Horse Creek only. You'd sever that piece, but yeah.
No, go ahead.
What is the posted speed limit through there on Etherton?
To my understanding, it's 30 miles an hour.
30, okay.
Is it 25? All right, I'm corrected. I stand
25.
corrected. 25, yep.
So, we've had the conversation. Does anyone wish to put forth a motion? Yep.
Rick, do we know, probably not, the residents that are there, which road are they more likely to use? Are they going to go, there's the one subdivision, what's that called? Etherton Valley. Do those residents typically go to the north to exit, going that direction for their destinations, or are they more southbound? Because, as a wild idea, have Orville Road, go out to 109, and then it's a dead end on Etherton there. So Orville still goes out, but to come south on Etherton would end up at a dead end, more or less at Orville or somewhere in there.
So to answer your question, no, I don't have any data or really knowledge of how they drive. I would suspect if I lived in that area, given the skew of Etherton at 109 and the limited sight distance, and we've talked about that intersection previously, I would tend to avoid it if I lived in that area. So I would be more inclined, I think, to go to and from the north, unless traffic volumes were light. But I don't know that for a fact. That's why I felt like if you severed that section, you direct them to the north, which that's the more favorable place. And I don't know. I don't live in that area. I don't know where those folks necessarily shop. If you're going to the grocery store, which way are you headed? Are you going to the east? Are you going, to the south? I really don't know. Maybe a resident could speak to that better.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, the comment that was made was, I suppose you could pull some. We do have traffic counts that would give some indication of directional preference, although that information is a bit skewed because it includes a lot of non-local traffic. But
Right, and my only concern, so Orville, does that exit out anywhere else except on Etherton Road? You can get to 109 from Orville at a different point, or you can't? Okay.
If you follow Orville, it is a fairly circuitous route, and it will end up on Shepherd Road.
Oh, okay.
After you drive for a ways. But if you ever get a chance to drive it, it's a narrow road, and it's
Right.
long and windy road.
More of the same.
Yeah.
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 Okay. So, well, given what appeared to be a reduction in volume since the signage would put up, but not addressing, the obvious problem of speeding, I'm going to move that we recommend to the city council that they consider putting in a speed sign, a radar speed sign. I would move that. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay. Any discussion? Hearing none, we'll move to the vote. All those in favor of the motion say aye. Aye. All those opposed? Motion carries.
Thank you. Can I suggest that the consideration be for 2 signs or just 1? one direction only, or would you like to consider both directions, northbound and southbound?
Oh, certainly both directions.
Both directions.
Yeah, so it'd be two signs, I'm sorry. I wasn't clear on that.
If no one objects, that's the direction we will take it.
Okay. Thank you. Mr. Reynolds, thank you for coming this evening. We very much appreciate it. Sure. All right, thank you very much. All right, moving on to new business, a topic near and dear to the captain's heart. We'll take a look at the police operating budget. Sam?
Good evening, Marshall, and everybody else. It's a pleasure to be in front of you this evening. I'm going to ask Captain Mundell to fill in any blanks, but really I just had a couple of issues that I want to point out relative to the operating budget for 2020. First, it's a 1.7% increase over the current year's budget, so I felt that was a consideration on the police department's part to keep costs to a minimum. Of course, 1.7% of a big number is a big number, but at the same time, it's within reason, and certainly, from a budgetary perspective, we can handle that. Another issue that I would point out is one of the line items, court protection and security. That's about $34,000 heading into 2020 budget. That is almost double what the cost was for this fiscal year, but the reason for that is with the addition of the metal detector for court nights, police department has pretty much had to bring on 3 additional officers to help man, that particular checkpoint and check bags and things. So, again, that would explain the big increase if you were to look at that over the 2019 budget. And then finally, from a capital perspective, they had about $55,000. Their initial request was about $70,000 in capital equipment. Through conversations with Mayor Bolin and our finance officer, as well as Captain Mundell, we identified some savings of about $14,000. Half of that would come from the removal of potential extension of our security system into city parks. We are having to rebid the security camera project here at City Hall, which might be news for some of you here this evening. But we found out that in August, a federal ban went into effect regarding the cameras that were included as part of the bid for the company that submitted the bid to us. And for security reasons, Director Vunich and Captain Mundell and I had conversations about that, so we're going to go ahead and rebid that project. Don't know the time frame yet on when we'll get that information out, but originally that project had included some cameras for the parks. That was removed from the project with discussions between public safety and other individuals. So the thought was to maybe include that back into the 2020 budget, but since we have to rebid the project, essentially, we're going to go ahead and keep that out of the budget for next year. So I would be happy to answer any budgetary questions, and then operationally, of course, Captain Mundell is here to assist as well.
Yeah, Sam, how much of what's the status of the Prop P money from end of this year projection on that, and projection of what you think will be next year's, and is there a sufficient buffer in there that if Captain Mundell and the force feels they need something during the year, we've got a buffer in there to cover them?
Yes, we've adopted a similar approach with the Proposition P money as we do with our general fund money. We include a 25% reserve to be available in the case that the department needs it for some unforeseen circumstance. But when you factor in the revenues that we receive from Prop P, which is about $1.8 million per year, we we have an existing fund balance, I think, in the Prop P fund of about $1 million. And I'd have to confirm that number with our finance officer, but we had a conversation with Captain Mundell, I think just yesterday or the day before, and that number's sticking in my head. And I can certainly confirm that in an email to the board once I get those numbers tomorrow. But off the top of my head, that's what's sticking in my mind. So yeah, there are adequate reserves in the Proposition P fund to be able to cover any potential circumstances.
Very good. Any other questions, concerns? No?
Just a comment on our contracting. I don't work in the chief's office. There's a lieutenant assigned there, and this is his job. But he's worked very hard to standardize costs. So what's contracted in Wildwood and contracted in other municipalities is pretty much a standard average as far as costs. So you're not necessarily paying for the individual, you're paying an average cost for a police officer and for supervision, that type of thing. So the three that are spelled out there, the captain, lieutenant, and one sergeant, are above normal supervision. It's designated as a precinct, so that's my position, being a precinct commander. The lieutenant, is a command officer, basically my right hand, and then the one sergeant is actually the NPO sergeant that mainly handles special events, that type of stuff, with his staff. So that's the only addition there. Otherwise, with X number of officers included is a supervision, and we add supervision or sergeants based on that in the main cost. And I think it's kind of listed down below. There's a little sentence there about the sergeants. That's all I have.
Very good. Without any further, please.
No, I'd make a motion, Mr. Marshall, if you will.
Please.
I'd move that we accept the recommendation for the budget for the police department, and that it move to the Public Works Committee.
Very good. Is there a second?
I second that.
Very good. We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? All those in favor, say aye. Aye. All those opposed? Motion carries. Moving on to the 5-year capital improvement program.
And just as a closing comment, appreciate Director Brown calling me new, and I will take advantage of that opportunity for as long as it's available to enjoy the honeymoon period. So thank you very much for your time. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Mr. Marshall, if I may, just anecdotal here. I was out on Tuesday at the involved in the special election over in District 99, and I was talking to someone who's fairly influential in the one of the parties in the area, and she, not knowing that I was in Wildwood Council, she started railing about how the cities are misusing their Prop P money. And she went on with several examples of people using it to fill potholes and repair sidewalks, et cetera, and I kind of glowed and said, well, I know that in Wildwood that is not the case at all, that we are very, very sensitive to that, and that money is used only for our police force, and so proud of our efforts in that area.
Excellent. Rick?
Next item, Mr. Marshall. 5-year capital improvement program. So, board members, I think I referenced I wanted to bring this to you this time of year previously at a prior meeting, and the thought here was to, at least in the future, involve the board a little more in terms of our capital improvements program, mainly from the standpoint of a lot of the issues that come to you tend to be related to projects or potential projects, potential capital projects. So wanted to at least start maybe this fall by bringing this to you, and if you think it's a waste of time, then I won't do it again, but I hope you find it somewhat valuable, and the thought would be to provide it to you for some feedback or comments. This is the time to do so. We have put together the budget and the capital improvements program, which will get presented, I guess, to council Tuesday night, yes. planning not to be there Monday night if I can remember, for their initial purview. So this would be an opportunity for you to provide any comment to me that you feel would be important to provide to the council or whatnot. But so I did provide a copy of it, and essentially the capital budget, technically speaking, is two parts, but most of it is the capital projects fund. But we also have a road and bridge fund. Now the capital projects fund is where we are funding most of our capital projects currently. And that is funded through a half-cent capital improvement sales tax, and it's divided up into different categories: parks and trails, road, bridge, and other capital investments, which, by the way, includes a very sought-after area, rural internet access. So the point there being, there's a lot of folks that would like to spend the money out of that fund, and there's a lot of needs throughout the city that we're trying to address with the Capital Projects Fund. Now, the Road and Bridge Fund has evolved over the years. It is funded by revenues that we get from a motor fuels gas tax from the state, as well as a road and bridge tax that's through the county. But it's supposed to be used for road and bridge acquisition, maintenance, and construction purposes. But frankly, over the last 4 years since I've been here, it has evolved mainly to be maintenance, capital maintenance items, not projects so much. We do fund our annual street slab and sidewalk project out of it. We fund our annual resurfacing work out of it. And then most of the other items are maintenance related, where we are doing patching and crack filling and things of that nature, so not large capital improvements. So wanted to point that out to you. That fund pulls in about $2.4 million a year, which is actually, and quote, if I'm misspeaking, Sam, please let me know, but I believe the Capital Projects Fund is similar in the amount of revenue it pulls in, about $2.4 million a year. So the one thing I was going to note, again, if I misspeak, Sam, correct me, but both those funds, as far as revenue, are fairly flat. There's not much in the way of growth. And over any 1 year, it's not probably a huge significance, but it does make a difference over 5 years or 10 years. And I think since I've been here, I'm starting to recognize that more and more. And so for that reason, particularly with regard to the capital projects, we have historically, and I think we will definitely continue to seek out as many areas where we can get grant funding as possible. We've been successful doing that in the past, and we will certainly look very hard to do that in the future and plan our work around that. So I did want to point out to you that in our Capital Projects Fund, we do have 3 federally funded projects, at least from the public works side, that we're working on, that are in there. 2 of them are bridge replacement projects, and 1 is a trail project. We have a bridge replacement on Etherton Road that's planned for next summer, over Bonham Creek, and that's a project we've been working on for several years, and it's federally funded, so the construction will be funded. 80% of our costs will be reimbursed by the federal government for that project. And then we have a shared use path project between 109 and Pond Road that we're designing right now. That one, when we submitted it, we only asked for 50% reimbursement, so it's a little bit lower cost share. And then the last one is one we just received notice of earlier in the year, which is a bridge on Wild Horse Creek Road, which is close to Austin Fort Road, and it's over Wild Horse Creek, and that's an 80-20 cost share as well. So if you like, we can go through the capital projects as much detail as you would like, or I can take any comments or questions you have currently. There's quite a few projects in there over the course of the 5 years, so it's a little... might be much to go through the whole program individually, but if that's your desire, we can certainly do that. Or I can talk to specific projects that might be funded for 2020. So I guess I'm open for any direction in that regard, or if you have any questions, just let me know what you'd like to do.
Any questions or comments for Rick? It's a very in-depth plan.
if you'd like me to run through just the road and bridge projects from the public works perspective that might affect safety and roadway projects, I can do that. I guess the other thing I would point out to you, if you do look at the program, and this kind of ties into the next item that's on the agenda, is if you look at the road and bridge projects, there are no improvements slated for Route 109 or any of the state routes that go through the city of Wildwood. And I know that you've had that in front of you on multiple occasions for different concerns, and I wanted to point that out to you. We are currently funding the improvements on Route 109 in large part with MoDOT, and we have 2 cost share projects that we secured funding for that are underway at that location right now. And the improvements to the north that were the 4-lane widening and the roundabout at Pond Grover Loop Road, that improvement was also a federally funded project that the city acquired the funding for. So we have done it in large part in that area of Route 109. Currently, there is nothing on our program right now for design or construction of improvements on Route 100 or Route 109 directly. However, that does not preclude us, and I think the thought would be to submit federal funding applications, potentially even here in the next few months, for projects that, if we are successfully funded, would obviously be added to the program potentially in the future. So even though it's not shown on the program now, I think the thought would be, if we can obtain federal funds for it, that we likely would propose adding it next year. So that would be the one point I would like to make. We'll make one more comment if I can. We have worked very hard this year to present, and I think Sam would probably be better to speak to this, but a balanced budget and or capital improvements program. In past years, I know for a fact, we tended to over-program and were overly optimistic on the projects we felt we could get accomplished. And the current year was typically not a balanced year as far as capital projects, but what tended to happen is we got to some of those projects, but not all of them. So a lot of those expenditures never occurred, frankly, and we pushed the projects. So this year we've taken a much more aggressive approach of putting together a program that is more constrained relative to the revenues. So I wanted to make that point as well. Now, the problem with that is that the more you restrain the capital program to the revenues that are expected, it really makes you realize how far stretched the dollars are, and how few projects we really can fund out of that $2.4 million a year. At least that's my opinion. I would assume Sam might share that as well, but it is eye-opening when you start looking at the number of projects, whether it's parks, trails, road, bridge, and you throw in other capital improvements such as rural internet access, that the money does, it gets spent rather easily. Let's put it that way. Would you like me to read through them?
No. That's a lot.
What's the first project up
Yeah.
for improvement?
Baker,
First
pardon?
priority.
The first project up is part of the construction. Or I think you mentioned a couple of them for the capital improvements. Really out of curiosity, what's the first one up this one?
Well, as far as 2020,
Mhm.
projects in 2020, so I tried to pull up the capital projects fund, because that's again where we're primarily funding large capital improvements out of it. But as you'll see, most of the projects in there are, we've got a couple flood-related projects that we are working on the design of right now. Woods Road has had a flooding issue for some time, as has Alt Road. At Route 109 has flooded when we've had the Merrimack River flood in 2015 and 2017. So those projects are included under the roadway improvements category.
And the bridge at Etherton Road.
And then the bridge at Etherton Road is slated for construction next year as well.
Looks like that's the largest single.
That would be
cost.
correct, yeah. And again, that was a federal funded project, so we are
Right.
getting reimbursed
Got
for about 80% of that one. Otherwise, we have several engineering projects that are underway. We also, as I mentioned, the Etherton Road Bridge 387 is a project where we got the federal funding, so we are doing engineering on that bridge under the bridge reconstruction category. And we do have a project to address the lack of sidewalks on a section of Strecker Road from Clayton Road up to the Ellisville city limit. Has been discussion amongst the council, and we have some monies there to start constructing some of those sidewalk sections as well. So that is included, and or part of that could be installing crosswalk flashing lights at 3 locations. And that's pretty much it, I think, for the 2020 year. A lot of the other expenditures are following up the design with right-of-way and or construction, whether it's the Alt Road or the Woods Road project. So we're trying to get into a process where we have a 3-year, for any project, we have a 3-year process where the first year is engineering, and the second year is right-of-way or easement acquisition, and the final year would be construction. So we break out each stage of the project and program it accordingly. So you'll see it show up in 3 separate years potentially in the 5-year program. So we're trying to get into the habit of doing that as well. So any other questions you may have? Any feedback?
Rick, I'll just say thank you for providing this information and offering to go through it. I think it'll be a good reference for other discussions forthcoming.
Thank you.
Thank you. So item C under new business, city priorities for future improvements to roads handled by MoDOT. And I think you had already started talking about that a bit.
Yes, Mr. Marshall and board members, this item was brought to the board a year ago, or a little over a year ago, and at that time, if you recall, the state of Missouri was going to voters and did go to the voters at the November election a year ago for a motor fuel gas increase. So the thought at that point in time was to try to develop a list of priority projects on MoDOT roads so that we could communicate to MoDOT, assuming they got more revenue, what we felt they should direct their attention to from our perspective as the city. Obviously, 109 and Route 100 essentially bisect the city. They greatly impact us. Many of these issues come to you directly. So in my mind, I thought it was beneficial that we tried to become a little more proactive and engage MoDOT with what we felt the needs were that should be addressed first. Well, as you know, that fuel tax increase did not occur. The voters turned it down. So unfortunately, that did not transpire. I'm bringing this back to you essentially to ask if you want to try to go through this process again and make it more of an annual endeavor on the board's part, so that we can say to MoDOT, well, this is the current list of priority projects that we have, and we've reviewed it through the Board of Public Safety, and then also ultimately through the City Council, and so that we can say that we've gone through that process of review, and it does have some meaning and some significance from the standpoint of the city. So we could certainly do this again if you choose, working from the list that was created last year, or we could start from scratch, or we could follow any procedure that you'd like, frankly, if you want to go in that direction. I do think it's even maybe more relevant now that they don't have the funds, that we're even more clear on what we'd like to see them do, because frankly it's harder to get their attention on projects and get them to spend money in the city of Wildwood. We see that constantly when we bring stuff to them. So essentially I'm leaving this up to you, board members. If you'd like to take this on again, we could do that and take it to the city council for their concurrence, and then do this again maybe next year at the same time.
Yeah, my 2 cents on this, Rick, is that I think annual is too short. Okay, it's the old adage of, it's like checking to see if your plant grows by pulling it up by the roots and see if the roots are growing, and nothing ever blooms that way. So I think we did a very thorough job. Denny was on council last year, and Captain Mundell, and we really did grind through these quite thoroughly at that time. I think it's a great list. I think I wouldn't recommend that we review it, perhaps maybe on a 5-year schedule, because MoDOT moves slowly, as we know. And if we keep changing our priorities, I think they're going to say, well, make up your mind, Wildwood, what do you really think is important? Well, I think these 12 are very important to us, and I would just think we just keep hammering MoDOT to get something done in these areas, because this committee has identified these 12 as issues that involve traffic safety for the city, and they should be accomplished. And as you know, MoDOT will do whatever we pay for. So they're more than willing to take on a project if we cough up all the money. So we have to keep this before the council, I think, as a constant over the years, because when the council comes down to allocating money and saying, do we do this landscape project or do we do this or that, I think this is a great list to keep holding up and saying, the Public Safety Committee has recommended these improvements in our city to make it safer for our citizens. Let's remember that. So if you're going to spend $100,000, let's make sure that that $100,000 or $200,000 or whatever it is spent in a way that is going to support our safety efforts and not diminish from them. So I think it's a great list. I'd hate to see us keep changing it every year. I would say maybe every 5 years.
I'd like to agree pretty with what Dave had to say there. It was pretty laborious and somewhat biased, but we spent a lot of time going through the list, and I think we did a good job. And to keep reviewing it and going back, unless something changes out there, and Rick brings it to our attention, that there's some reason, to go back. I see no need to revisit it this year, anyways.
There it is.
That's what I asked for. That would be fine.
I'm assuming that none of these 12, I know the first several do not appear to have been addressed, and I'm assuming none of them have due to lack of funds at MoDOT. And so I would echo the concerns of the gentleman that they've already stated, that we need to be clear on what our priorities are, and if these have not been addressed, we need to keep pushing those forward.
I mean, my only thought would be, we have talked a bit about 109 and Etherton Road and whether there should be improvements there, and that intersection certainly lacks in terms of a left turn lane and that kind of thing. So that, I don't believe we called out that project specifically in this listing. You could consider doing that potentially, although we do have, the way it was kind of set up was we have placeholders in identified. So, a turn lane at an intersection, more or less, is on there. I thought we had the generic turn lanes / lighting at side roads. So, it's kind of on there. We're saying we recognize that need. We just haven't said specifically that that's a location and that should be split out and called out on the program or the list of projects. And I think from the department's perspective, just to add one more thing, if that's okay, I would like to say we will be looking for projects for federal funding applications very soon. In fact, I may bring that to you next month. But the thought would be to say, okay, if we're going to apply for a grant to improve 109 at BA South Junction, which is one we've done before, it would be consistent with this list. And that would be an example to say, yeah, it is consistent. That was one of the top priorities on this list. Therefore, it does provide us some guidance relative to the projects that we would request funding for first.
So you've pointed out a good reason to possibly modify the list.
That's the only one that comes to mind.
No, I get you to better define the turn lanes, and if we have some specific issues, and maybe what we should do is just have you kind of submit those, and then we say, yeah, it's a good idea, and then we just put them on a list, if that's okay with everybody, because it's not a deviation of the list from the list. It's more of a refinement, in that particular case which you were talking about, Rick, which I personally would be fine with. If we wanted to flesh it out a little bit and refine it so that it would be a little more specific in some locations.
I could certainly add that project and reference it specifically. Then the question again would be, where would you want it placed, or how would we want to go about prioritizing it relative to the other projects? Oh, and I guess the other we do have it on there. So the other thought was Project 6, or the one that ranked number 6, new roundabout route CC Wild Horse Creek Road, Etherton. That has been funded, so it's not constructed, but it has been funded. So from that perspective, it's a project that's been obligated and should be done. So you could almost remove that one from the list, or maybe you leave it there until it's underway. But that was the other thought I had.
I would tend to leave it until I see it done. That's just, I'm not from Missouri, but you're going to have to show me. So
That's fine.
Rick, will we ask for any, we have any buy-in, does the state ask us for any money on that roundabout?
No.
No? Good, okay.
do you need us to approve the list? Or, because it's been approved before, this is just subject to review and consult, but.
Yeah, I guess if we're going to change it, I'd probably ask you to approve it again. If you want to just leave it as is, then that's fine as well. But if we're going to add a project to it, I would think you'd want to consider maybe reapproving it for this year. Would that make sense?
It does.
Well, I'm new to the list, if I can say that I'm new. So I'm hearing you say that number 6 is funded and in progress. Is that what I heard?
That's correct, yeah.
Okay. Would it make sense to have a status column where instead of removing it from the list or leaving it on the list, that we would just add a status? So for those with short-term memory, we'll remember. And then the other thing I heard you suggest, Rick, was to further define either number 8 or number 9 with the turn lane. Are there other items or other streets that we're not considering if that needs to be updated? Or would it be like 8A or 8B, or what would that look like if you wanted to further detail that?
Well, that would be an approach we could take as well, if you'd want to just call it 8A and then split out under that category of specific side roads such as Etherton. I suppose we could do it that way. Maybe if you took that approach and just left it as ranking number 8, we wouldn't be technically changing it. We just call it good. But I think the thought would be whether you wanted to specifically identify that project, the Route 109 at Etherton Road, because what we were looking at was a left turn lane and the realignment of the intersection potentially to eliminate the skew angle that's in place there.
Okay, so it would be an addition or an additional line item then?
It could be an additional line item, correct. Just to call it out so it identifies that you've recognized that project as a need. Moving forward, relative to the federal funding, we're going to be limited to the number of projects every year that we request. So we're probably going to have to boil it down to 1 or 2 projects. So it's difficult to really undertake a lot of these at any given time. So realistically, there's only so much we can get accomplished utilizing federal funding. I mean, there's just not enough monies available to us typically to really make much of an impact to that list, frankly.
Okay, thank you for the education. So that takes us full circle back to the once every 5 years.
There is some merit to saying that because, frankly, things do move relatively slow, and they are contingent on the amount of monies that are available.
All right, so taking your comment aside, to adding a column, I don't think you would object to that. So we have a status line there, if we could. And as projects come up under, turn lanes, lighting at side roads, if we could just further identify those when they come up. And if there's more than one, then we can attempt to prioritize those at that time. Does anyone object to that process option? So.
Okay. That'd be fine.
Make that happen going forward. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Moving on, the Deer Management Committee. I know Dave is not here tonight. A lot of work has been done by that subcommittee. I know I'm on it. Rick's on it. If you want to talk to it, you can, or I will. But I think tonight was to simply provide you with what we hope to put out as a survey of the public to attempt to gather their feedback and thoughts on different options for dealing with the deer herd here in Wildwood. This would be a survey that would be sent out, push forward on our social media platforms. We're contemplating a postcard, but this would be something people would access online and be able to give the city feedback, more for the council moving forward as well, so they can get a sense of where the public is feeling regarding the deer population issue. If that's correct. I know the council is meeting. There's an opportunity to get this in front of them next Tuesday.
It is on the agenda currently as a for information item, or Tuesday evening. I said Monday. Tuesday evening. So the thought was and Mr. Williams stated that he would be glad to be there to speak to it, but entertain any questions from the council relative to the survey at that time. But the intent would be to move forward, hopefully by the end of the month, with launching the survey and starting the process of getting feedback. So I think if there's any questions or desires on the part of the full board to modify the management or the survey, I think now would be the time. Or if you do not agree with the planned schedule and prefer that it be modified, this would be a good time to talk about that. We are currently using the social media to put out some educational bits, and the thought would be to tie this survey into the very tail end of that potentially, to notify residents that oh, by the way, we have a survey and we would really like to get your opinion on the deer situation in the city of Wildwood, and then potentially maybe mail a postcard out and or publicize this through our weekly e-newsletter that we send out or directly through emails. So I think it's come a long ways. I think it's a pretty nice survey. It's got some really good information in it. Michelle's worked real hard on researching it and looking at other surveys that have been done. And the other thing, I think she sent it, and I know she did send it to Aaron Shank today. So hopefully we'll be able to get feedback from Aaron Shank with conservation relative to the questions that are part of the survey.
Can I add something?
Sure, Michelle would like to add something.
I just want you to know this was the latest printable copy that we had. So Sarah Von Wert, the police department, we've been doing revisions back and forth since Tuesday. So if you want, before this goes to council, I can send you a link that has the latest revisions, and because some of the things in this copy are different since Tuesday, and there will be a couple of maps and images that are added as well. And at the end of it, it will take you to a page, that says to learn more, and that will go back to our website. There'll be a Deer Management Committee page that comes off the Board of Public Safety page, and that will have more links and information.
Right, and this was not done in a vacuum as well. We looked at other municipalities in the area because they've done similar surveys, and we use those as good examples and exemplars to sort of base our questionnaire around. Just again to gauge the feeling of the community. Dave?
Yeah, Marshall, if I may, just on the last page on the about the overpopulation solutions, you use the word culling in here, and I'm sure that's a proper word to use, but to the average person that I talk to, a hunting program is what they visualize. And if you say culling and don't expand on that, I think that might lead to some questions about how you're going to cull it. Just personally, I would substitute, instead of saying culling program, I would say a hunting program administered by the Department of Conservation. And likewise, under the item 16, in favor of trap and cull, again, it's actually trap and euthanize. Isn't that the actual action that's going to take place?
Yes.
Just my sensitivity to those who might look at the word cull and have their own opinion of what cull means versus what we really think.
I guess the reason that we decided to go with the two separate words was that hunting was more designated for people who are hunting from deer stands, doing their own personal hunting on personal property, whereas the culling was a program. I don't know if there's a friendlier term that we could resort to, but I did want
just define it so whatever what you're trying to say there, just have it spelled out. So I think that's what they listed.
Yeah, I just trying to put some street definition to the term cull. I guess what do we hear every day? Okay.
Well, I'm sure we can. We can do that. Probably the dictionary definition would be the simplest thing to use. It'll be fully descriptive, and that is one of the points of the surveys, and we wanted to get across, just what the options are, so you can gauge the public sentiment regarding those. And 15, I do know we'd made a couple of changes that to make it more expressive that this really was hiring hunters to go out rather than having someone else doing it.
Yeah.
Professional hunters.
Was there any discussion, Scott, about a option under overpopulation solution is do nothing?
She did add a question that said, do you feel the number of deer in Wildwood are, there's too many, not enough, or just right?
Right,
We
and
did
that's on the-
actually add that
Within the
in.
first 3 questions.
Yeah.
We added that. Like, again, this was the latest printed version,
Mm-hmm.
which is why Michelle's saying the one
I'm
going forward,
pers-
we can send a link. to.
Yeah, I'm personally not able to
Yeah.
print any kind of good quality of this, so I have to get it from Sarah. But when you go on the link, there'll be a little bit more information and a few more questions and a few taken out. So
And who is this going to? I mean, how are the citizens going to have access to this?
We're going to, if I understood correctly, we're going to send everyone in town that we have an email address for. We'll get it that way. I believe we're going to advertise it in our social media program. And there's some discussion, though we'll have to get council's approval, because this would cost money, to send every household in town a postcard notifying them, hey, this survey is available, here's the link to it, please go and fill that out so we can gather your information.
That was a question that I was going to bring up to our city administrator, who I believe is still with us.
So, but there's an opportunity to get this before the council. I believe it's a point of information for the council at this meeting.
That's the way it has been set up in the agenda, is that it's provided for information. So if there's any questions that the council has of it, we'll address it to the best of our ability, and hopefully I'm not expecting it to be a controversial item by any stretch. I mean, I think that was one of the messages I thought we got pretty loud before, was we really want to get feedback from the public, and that's exactly what we intend to do with the survey. So,
right. So, in order to get that going, I would entertain a motion to put this before the council as scheduled.
I'll make that motion.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Discussion. Hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
thank you.
Aye. All those opposed? Motion passes.
thank you.
And with that, I believe we have come to the end of the meeting. There are no other items on the agenda. So, would accept a motion to adjourn. And second? All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed say, I want to stay here even later. Nobody. Okay, very good. Meeting adjourned.